What you're about to hear is not speculation, not rumor, and not an attempt to sensationalize tragedy. It is a careful, respectful examination of publicly released footage, analyzed through the lens of behavioral science and modern pattern recognition. This case deeply affected millions of people, and at its center was a young woman whose life mattered. The purpose of this discussion is educational. To understand how warning signs can appear in real time, how human behavior under stress can be misread, and how technology today can help us recognize patterns that might otherwise be overlooked. When the body camera footage was released, viewers saw what appeared to be a tense roadside interaction. Two officers, a stopped van, a couple traveling across the country. At first glance, it looked like a domestic dispute call, something law enforcement handles every day. But what made this footage different was how much of it was recorded, preserved, and later scrutinized by experts in psychology, behavioral analysis, and even artificial intelligence systems trained to detect stress indicators. The footage captures a moment of emotional intensity. One person appears visibly distressed, crying, apologizing, expressing self-blame. The other appears calmer, composed, cooperative. To many casual viewers, this contrast suggested a simple narrative. But behavioral experts caution that emotional expression alone does not determine responsibility, aggression, or victimhood. In fact, advanced behavioral modeling shows that heightened emotional display can correlate with anxiety, fear of consequences, or a history of conflict avoidance. Modern AI-assisted behavioral analysis systems examine variables humans often miss: micro-expressions, vocal tremors, speech pacing, interruptions, self-referential language, deflection patterns. These systems do not determine guilt or innocence. They detect patterns of stress, dominance, and psychological imbalance within conversations. In this footage, analysts have pointed to several recurring dynamics. First, asymmetrical emotional regulation. One individual repeatedly apologizes, even when describing being upset. Apologies are offered not only for actions, but for feelings. Statements like, "I'm sorry," appear frequently in rapid succession. Behavioral linguistics research suggests that excessive apologizing during conflict can indicate internalized blame conditioning. It may reflect a person accustomed to de-escalating tension even when they are not the primary aggressor. Second, narrative framing. When describing the incident, the calmer individual tends to focus on specific behaviors, scratching, hitting, emotional reactions, while subtly minimizing broader relational context. AI discourse models identify this as event-focused redirection. It narrows attention to a single physical moment rather than the emotional buildup that preceded it. Third, stress incongruence. Emotional distress does not always align with verbal content. In the footage, distress appears elevated even when the topic seems minor. Behavioral specialists suggest this mismatch can indicate underlying chronic tension rather than a single isolated argument. It's important to emphasize, this analysis does not rewrite history. It does not assign legal conclusions. It asks a different question: what signals were present that we are now better equipped to interpret? Body camera footage captures more than words. It captures posture, distance between individuals, who speaks first, who interrupts, who attempts to physically position themselves closer to authority figures. AI-driven spatial analysis of the footage shows subtle positioning patterns. One individual remains physically oriented toward officers, seeking reassurance. The other periodically distances themselves, creating space while maintaining composure. Behavioral psychologists note that in high-conflict relationships, one partner may instinctively align with perceived authority for validation, while the other manages impression control. Impression control is a key concept here. It refers to the management of how one is perceived by others during conflict. Calm demeanor does not automatically equal innocence. Distress does not automatically equal aggression. research consistently shows that individuals who are practiced at emotional regulation during external scrutiny may still be capable of volatility outside that environment. Another pattern experts highlight is self-diminishing language. Phrases indicating personal instability, self-criticism, or over-responsibility can reflect someone who internalizes relational conflict. AI semantic analysis flags repetitive self-blame statements as potential indicators of psychological imbalance within a partnership dynamic. At the time of the stop, officers were operating with limited context. They had a snapshot, not a timeline. They made a decision based on visible injuries and immediate behavior. Law enforcement training emphasizes observable physical evidence and immediate threat assessment. They are not trained to conduct full-scale psychological evaluations roadside. In recent years, however, behavioral AI systems have been trained on thousands of hours of conflict interactions. These systems detect patterns such as coercive control markers, conversational dominance ratios, interruption frequency, and escalation cycles. When applied retroactively to this footage, analysts say certain indicators align with relational instability patterns documented in domestic violence research. One such indicator is cyclical reassurance. In the footage, we see attempts at mutual reassurance. Statements like, "We love each other," and "We're just having a bad day." Behavioral experts note that emphasizing relational stability immediately after a conflict can signal an attempt to normalize volatility. Another factor is stress synchronization. AI acoustic analysis measures vocal stress markers, pitch variation, breath irregularity, micro pauses. Elevated stress markers were detected consistently in one individual throughout the interaction, even during moments of supposed calm resolution. Why does this matter? Because modern analysis tools are not about revisiting tragedy, they are about prevention. If body cam systems integrated AI-driven stress flagging in real time, officers could potentially receive alerts when behavioral imbalances exceed baseline conflict thresholds. This would not replace human judgment, but it could supplement it. Critics argue that retrospective analysis risks unfairly interpreting normal relationship conflict as something more sinister. That is a valid concern. Not every argument is a warning sign. Not every emotional display is predictive. However, experts emphasize the importance of cumulative patterns, not isolated behaviors. The footage also reveals subtle relational power cues: who speaks over whom, who corrects the narrative, who smiles during recounting of distress. AI systems quantify these cues by tracking conversational overlap and facial tension markers. Facial action coding systems detect micro-expressions lasting fractions of a second. While no single expression proves intent, clusters of incongruent expressions, smiling during recounting of stress, tightening jaw muscles during reassurance, can indicate internal tension. Again, this is not about labeling someone a villain, it is about understanding complexity. Many viewers initially interpreted the footage emotionally. Social media reactions were polarized. Some believed officers made the best call they could. Others believed warning signs were missed. The truth is likely more nuanced. Real-time decisions are constrained by policy, evidence, and safety protocols. Behavioral science teaches us that high-conflict relationships often display alternating vulnerability and control. One partner may appear fragile publicly while the other appears stable. The stability, however, may reflect practiced self-presentation rather than internal equilibrium. AI behavioral modeling introduces a new dimension: consistency analysis. It compares speech patterns across time segments. In this footage, analysts observed consistency in one individual's narrative pacing and variability in the other's emotional intensity. Variability can be linked to acute stress response. Acute stress responses activate the sympathetic nervous system. Rapid breathing, tearfulness, disorganized speech. These are not indicators of guilt. They are indicators of emotional overload. An important educational takeaway here is this: visible distress should not automatically be equated with culpability. Calm demeanor should not automatically be equated with safety. Experts in coercive control research note that individuals experiencing prolonged emotional strain may display exaggerated self-blame during public scrutiny. This can be mistaken for admission of primary fault. The footage also highlights the limitations of snapshot policing. Officers did separate the couple temporarily. They provided resources. They documented injuries, but they did not have access to behavioral AI dashboards that could flag relational volatility markers. In recent years, some law enforcement agencies have begun exploring machine learning systems that analyze 911 call tone stress levels and body cam audio for escalation risk. These tools remain controversial but potentially transformative. What this case underscores is the gap between visible conflict and underlying relational patterns. It is also essential to speak about media consumption responsibly. Rewatching footage should not become voyeurism. It should be reflection. The individual at the center of this case was a human being with family, friends, and a future. Any discussion must preserve dignity. When analyzing the footage, experts emphasize 3 educational points. First, emotional intensity in conflict does not define character. Second, pattern recognition requires time series data, not isolated incidents. Third, prevention relies on understanding relational dynamics before they escalate beyond intervention. AI cannot feel empathy. It cannot replace human intuition, but it can detect patterns across thousands of cases, identifying statistical correlations invisible to the naked eye. For example, AI studies of domestic dispute footage have found that disproportionate apologizing combined with high vocal stress and narrative self-blame correlates strongly with individuals later identified as experiencing ongoing psychological strain within relationships. That does not retroactively assign blame in this case. It highlights a broader phenomenon. Another pattern experts observed is deflection through minimization. Statements framing incidents as just stress or just a bad day can sometimes mask repetitive cycles. Again, context matters. The officers in the footage followed protocol based on visible evidence. Hindsight introduces variables they could not access. That distinction is critical. It is easy to judge decisions after outcomes are known. It is harder to acknowledge systemic limitations that existed at the time. Modern AI integration into body cam review processes aims not to replace officer judgment, but to provide supplemental risk scoring. A high-risk score could trigger mandatory follow-up welfare checks or referral to specialized domestic response units. Behavioral AI systems also analyze proximity patterns. In the footage, physical distance fluctuates during conversation. One individual seeks closeness for reassurance. The other maintains moderate distance while speaking confidently. These patterns are not definitive but contribute to risk modeling. Speech tempo analysis reveals another insight. Faster speech interspersed with breath interruptions is associated with acute emotional strain. Slower measured speech with controlled breathing often reflects intentional self-presentation. Again, these are patterns, not verdicts. If there is one lesson from this analysis, it is this: relationships under visible strain deserve careful attention, not dismissal. Technology has advanced rapidly. In 2025, AI can reconstruct blurred footage, enhance audio clarity, and detect micro-patterns of stress in real time. Had such systems existed widely during the incident captured in this footage, perhaps additional context would have emerged. Or perhaps the outcome would have been the same. We cannot know. What we can do is learn. Educational research shows that early identification of coercive control markers reduces long-term harm. These markers include isolation language, self-diminishment, disproportionate blame acceptance, and emotional volatility, mismatched to event severity. In the footage, several of these markers appear in varying degrees, not conclusively, not definitively, but observably. Public reaction to this case also demonstrates the power and danger of online analysis. Crowdsourced interpretation can amplify awareness, but it can also oversimplify. Responsible examination means avoiding definitive labels. It means acknowledging uncertainty. It also means recognizing that individuals in distress may not articulate their experience clearly under pressure. Law enforcement encounters are inherently stressful. Cameras amplify that stress. Another significant educational point. Domestic conflict assessments rely heavily on visible injury evidence. Psychological patterns are harder to quantify without tools. AI offers potential quantification, but ethical oversight is essential. Privacy advocates warn against over-reliance on algorithmic judgment. Behavioral scientists caution that AI models must be trained on diverse data to avoid bias. These debates are ongoing. What remains undeniable is that body camera footage is more than documentation. It is data. Data that, when analyzed responsibly, can inform training, prevention strategies, and intervention frameworks. If you take anything from this analysis, let it be awareness. Pay attention to relational patterns in your own life or the lives of those you care about. Chronic self-blame, emotional exhaustion, fear of conflict escalation. These deserve support, not silence. This discussion is not about rewriting the past. It is about equipping the future. The individual at the center of this tragedy deserved safety, understanding, and peace. That truth stands independent of any analysis. As technology evolves, so too must our ability to interpret human behavior with nuance. AI can highlight patterns, but empathy must guide response. Thank you for listening with respect and an open mind.